Assalamu alaikum, good afternoon, and a very warm welcome back to the Maldives Accountants Forum 2018. I, Huda Fahim, will be your Master of Ceremonies for this session of Maldives Accountants Forum. Let me briefly take you through the agenda for afternoon session of Maldives Accountants Forum Day 1. The session will commence with a panel discussion on changes and challenges. The panel will consist of Deputy President of IFAC, Dr. Inki Ju, Registrar of the Companies, Ms. Mariyam Visam, Founder of FJS, Ms. Fareeha Shareef, and Partner of EY, Mr. Krishna Rengaraj. This panel discussion will be moderated by Assistant Auditor General, Mr. Hussain Niyazy, followed by a keynote by John Maxwell Certified Coach, Mr. Hussein Afif, on the topic Achieving Professional Excellence. Finally, Day 1 of Maldives Accountants Forum will conclude with vote of thanks from Manager of Auditor General's Office, Ms. Dina Rafiu. Next is the panel discussion on changes and challenges. Panelists are Registrar of the Companies, Ms. Mariyam Visam, Deputy President of IFAC, Dr. Inki Ju, Founder of FJS, Ms. Fareeha Shareef, and Partner of EY, Mr. Krishna Rengaraj. This panel discussion will be moderated by Assistant Auditor General, Mr. Hussain Niyazy. Introducing to the panel are Ms. Fareeha Shareef, Founder and Senior Partner of FJS Consultancy. Ms. Fareeha Shareef is a fellow member of CPA and ACCA and a member of the Institute of Internal Auditors and the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. Concurrent to her current postings, she has been an independent consultant for Adam Smith International since 2012. She has also served as the chairperson of Bank of Maldives. Prior to that, she served a term of 6 years as a board member of Pension Office. And introducing to the panel our Registrar of Companies, Ms. Mariyam Visam. She is also serving as a board member of CMDA, concurrent to her current posting. Ms. Visam has held key positions in the financial sector during a period spanning 6 years. She was the Deputy CEO of CMDA and a board member of Pension Office. She has invaluable exposure and knowledge in her area of expertise. Introducing to the panel Partner of EY, Mr. Krishna Rengaraj. Mr. Krishna is a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Sri Lanka and a member of the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants of UK. He is also a member of the Chartered Institute of Marketing UK. Krishna is engaged in public accounting practice for 25 years. He has served clients in tourism, construction, trading, and banking industry. He is a keen participant in the Maldives accountancy development. He has been a resident of Maldives since 1997. A familiar face by now, Dr. Inki Ju will be joining the other panelists for this discussion. And moderating the panel discussion will be Assistant Auditor General, Mr. Hussain Niyazy. Mr. Niyazy has immense experience in financial statements, audits of public sector entities, and SOEs. He is also the chair of the Licensing and Disciplinary Committee responsible for the issuance of audit practicing license and regulating the audit profession and contributing towards the professional development of private sector auditors. Mr. Niyazy is a chartered management accountant with CIMA membership and experience in auditing and accounting professions. Without further ado, kindly please welcome the panel members, Mr. Hussain Niyazy, Dr. Inki Ju, Ms. Fareeha Shareef, Ms. Mariyam Visam, and Mr. Krishna Rengaraj.
Assalamu alaikum, and a very good afternoon to you all. and welcome to the panel discussion of the Maldives Accountants Forum 2018. It's an honor to moderate this session. We have an esteemed panel consist of Professor Nkiju, Mr. Krishna, Ms. Fareeha, Shareef, and Ms. Visam. Last year's forum, we discussed on the ethical and professional dimensions facing the accounting profession. It looked from the issues from the accounting profession's perspective. This year we brought a twist. Now we would like to change the focus of the discussion of how the accounting and the audit profession can add value. How we can add value primarily to the businesses. In the morning, we heard the minister speaking about the need for the accountants to do research, how the research can contribute towards formulating national policies and taking the competitive advantage of this country. We also heard from a prominent businessman, a very successful businessman, Mr. Jana, why he has only 60 seconds for the accountant. So given all these challenges and given all these demanding needs, we would like to have the discussion on how we can add value. My opening question goes to Professor Nkiju. So if you could explain to us what the key changes that has taken place in the profession today.
Thank you very much for that
Yes.
question. Actually, with this morning we already talked about technology development. It's actually from the fourth industrial revolution that will affect accounting profession greatly. And there in the newspaper they say that accounting profession will be replaced by that machine learning or artificial intelligence. But actually, that will not happen that way. We are using that technology development, and we are moving from the low level tasks such as comparing the document and adding the numbers. From that task, we will leave it to that machine, that artificial intelligence or that. But we are going to move much higher level value creation, like a judgment, business judgment, that company's financial condition, about their financial condition. So for that accountant is a great opportunity to change from just like a bean counters, into that more kind of a decision makers. So that's how our technology will affect our profession in the near future. Second is that now currently that you will see that even though we have some international accounting standard, international audit standard, ethics, still we have some scandals now and then all over the world. Europe, sometimes in Asia, sometimes in some other continent, frequently there is some scandals about accounting and financial reporting. So new trend will be more kind of monitoring and oversighting by some institutional regulators that we are going to face. But it will be different from the past. In the past, the regulators, they are the guardians of the public interest. They will oversight the profession. But new way is that there will be some cooperation, multi-stakeholder approach. Not only that regulators, but also private entities, PAOs, or that professional accountant. They are also interested in guarding public interest too. And even that investors, they are also interested in that public interest. So new model, new public oversight model will be multi-stakeholder model, not just like only that government to build this. That's why that's in the Maldives, creating PAO is very important. Otherwise, the Auditor General, you can do it, all the oversight, but by creating the PAOs, We are going to have an independent oversight board, multi-stakeholder model. So actually, in the future, there will be some multi-stakeholders. Not only one entities will take over another, oversight another entity, but there will be a cooperation between the regulators and all other stakeholders. That we will see in the future. And another thing is that up to now, it's easy to criticize external auditors if something goes wrong. But actually, it started from preparers. Auditors are just auditing it, but with a reasonable degree of certainty and make a professional judgment. They are not auditing 100%. It's not possible. So that's nowadays, it's now more kind of a concern about the value chain of that accounting information, how the generation. So not only the auditors, but also actually that preparers. They also, that the responsibility of them is also very much emphasized. So as an example is that, as at Auditor General Staff Member mentioned, so NOCLA is that emphasized not only that professional accountant auditors, but also that the preparers, they have obligation to see when they unlawful things, irregular things, to report to that CEOs first, of course, but it is not corrected, then they have obligation to report to the regulators, the oversight board. So that kind of changes, I expect that will impact that accounting profession in the future.
Yes, thank you, Professor, for giving the international perspective. If I may ask, Krishna, being a professional accountant who has worked in the Maldives for the past 25, 30 years, how, given the Maldives context, what are the issues that hit the Maldives prominently?
While we looked at these changes, I think quite a bit was discussed today. The technological change has the most fascinating effect on our profession, in business and profession. And those changes are, those impact is profoundly felt. When I was a young boy, I got a gift of this a book, this Alibaba and 40 Thieves. I think most of you might have read this one. In that book, this guy goes to this, he walks into a cave and he says, Sesame ouvre toi, and the door opens. And every time he goes, he collects, and he keeps on doing this. That bit, I got riveted by this piece of story, that you can, stand outside a door, and then you can, say something, and it would recognize it and open the door for you. But I tried to do that in every door in the house, but nothing opened for several years. But 40 years later, today when you walk into my office, every day I hear there's a voice recognition, and you can mention your name and it opens, or you can press. Sometimes it's a bit frustrating, but you press and it opens. So, what was a childhood fantasy or a fascination today is an everyday reality. So much so it is taken for granted. So that's the the impact that technology has. This just to say a very mundane example, but look at the impact it has on the profession. Mr. Jayasinghe this morning covered quite a bit of that. The role that accountants perform, the large volume repetitive task, I think it is for automation. It's more than likely automation. However, those where we use judgment, intuition, interpretation will stay. That's for our domain, and our skill and professional knowledge and experience will create value there. Then you have the challenge of today self-administered accounting softwares by businesses. Those are widely available. Those are easily acquired. They are available at a reasonable price and very user-friendly and easy to implement. So again, the storers of data, or you gathering data and data gatherers and processors, that role is also out. That type of accountants, no more. Then the cloud-based accounting. Now that's a tremendous opportunity. they provide greater flexibility as opposed to desktop financial accounting systems or spreadsheet based packages, accounting systems which are error prone. The cloud based you can work from anywhere, and it gives you an opportunity to outsource work, and you can be in a distant island but still you can hire someone to do that work for you. Then the seamless integration of online real-time data in the accounting softwares. Now that type of technology was traditionally available for a long time for the larger organizations. Now SMEs can have that type of technology. So with that type of data, availability of data, you can provide a greater degree of value added service to SME sector. And not to mention the mobile technology, development of the mobile technology in the social media. You can transmit data in a fraction of a second, large volumes of data, and you are also able to, you have now technology to assimilate that data and analyze and interpret into useful information. So you can provide information to stakeholders, a lot of information, more than any corporate report can provide. So you have these changes, some of the changes to give you some examples, but technology in my view has the most profound and underlying changes. Now if we look at some of the how do we really manage these changes, how do we really take advantage of these changes. Our training and development should factor, the learning has to factor digital technology, cloud-based accounting, cyber security. I think Mr. Jayasingh also talked about the risk that you will have as you migrate into these forms of as you embrace this modern technology. So you need to manage those risks. Then we need to constantly be updated about the international financial reporting standard. Those are globalizing at a very fast rate, and changes are happening at a very fast rate, so you need to keep up to date. Then also the regulatory changes, which is also another key change that is happening. And those changes are like the anti-money laundering, AML, CFT regulations and compliances. We have to report on those here in the Maldives now. Then from the tax regulations, you have this base erosion and profit shifting concept that is being intergovernmental through cooperation. Governments want to save their tax base. So again we have these changes impacting us. From 2018, this tax year, there is a thin capitalization rule that comes into play. So we have to bear that in mind when we do the computations. Then our skill base, I think it was adequately emphasized today, is from our technical knowledge of accountancy and finance. In addition to that, we need to have a greater focus on other skills, negotiation skills, leadership skills, taking ownership of issues, and be a critical member in that board. I think accountants have to bring that value into the foray. Then also we need to work on building a brand, positioning ourselves and building a brand, which is also a very important aspect. I just want to share with you a small experience. A CEO friend of mine, about a year back, sent me an email. He's not a client, he's a friend of mine. I just brought a copy of that email so I can read it out to you. So he had given a definition of an accountant. So I think you can check this out. The typical accountant is a man. He is past middle age. He is intelligent. He is passive, non-committal. He is polite in contact, but at the same time unresponsive. He is calm and composed as a concrete post. He is without charm, he is unfriendly. He is minus bowels, he has no passion or sense of humor. He will finally go to hell. So this fellow must have had a very bad day in office, I wanted to respond to this. Yes, so I wanted to respond to him. Obviously, if it's any other email, I left it go, it directly impacts my life. So I didn't have something suitable to say. I just rested for a day or two, maybe a few more days. Then I got the answer. The answer came in a Hollywood movie. Ben Affleck stars in a movie called The Accountant. I don't know how many of you have seen this. I'm sure most of you might have seen it. If you have not seen it, I recommend please have a look at this movie. It's an amazing movie. In that movie, he stars, he's, his IQ is at some 200, I think. He's he's a mathematics expert. He's great in statistics. He's a sharpshooter, and he's a martial arts specialist. And he's also a forensic accountant. That is the bit that I was most interested about. And he had a girlfriend who is also a fantastic accountant. So, not all, his definition about the man. So I sent a clip of that movie to my friend, but I have not heard from him since then.
Yes, thank you, Sir Krishna, for the insights and also for the advice. And I think we should all watch the movie. If I may ask Visam, as the Registrar of Business and as the regulator of companies, if we can turn the focus to the SMEs, and if you can enlighten us on the challenges that the SMEs face with regard to the financial management, and also what inhibits them from growing.
Niyazy, I think it's important to understand that to start off with how regulatory agencies such as the Ministry of Economic Development, and I'm sure in other agencies as well, the way we view businesses has changed over the past 5 to 10 years, I would say. Traditionally, we believe that when it comes to businesses, annual filings and payment of annual fees are the most important things a business should do. But over the past, especially over the past 5 years, we have put in a lot of emphasis on governance structures. And today what we believe is that it's extremely important for every single business to be able to understand the role of an accountant. And what we believe is that the role of an accountant doesn't necessarily kick off once they have to source external services for the purpose of carrying out an audit. We believe that especially if it's a sole trader or even if it's a company, the moment they need to make a decision on the capital and the moment when they have to make a decision as to how the company should be formed, founding shareholders need to have some sort of a engagement with accountants or people who are familiar with the financial arena, I would say, financial services arena. And the reason we believe this is because one of those key problems that most of the micro and small scale businesses face is maintaining records. And as you all know, maintaining records doesn't kick in somewhere down the road. It's something that they have to start off. It's one of the fundamentals that every single business should be aware of. So we believe that this is something which is very important for any entrepreneur. So we have a higher level of, we put higher level of emphasis on carrying out awareness programs and also providing educational programs for startups nowadays. And I think a lot of you will be aware that the ministry conducts a startup program every single weekend or every week. We have business centers across 7 regions in the Maldives, including Mali City. And we believe that the latter part, when it comes to the Inland Revenue Authority as well as the government at large, one of the main concerns is small and medium-sized enterprises lack the ability to maintain proper records and, of course, complete the regulatory filings, including filing annual accounts and director's report. And I believe that if this fundamental principle is believed throughout the system, that every single entrepreneur, every single company needs to have some level of technical input from accountants from the very beginning, this problem can be resolved. And then, of course, you all would realize that a continuing business on an annual basis, they face these problems. And also once they reach the growth stage, again they face the same problem. So I think it's very important to understand that if the fundamentals are right, and if the entities are able to put in a proper governance system, including the relevant systems, processes which are required for the purpose of recording and maintaining accounts, no single entity, no single entrepreneur will be like last night. I think most of those entrepreneurs would be wide awake up until 12 o'clock to ensure that they manage to go ahead with the filings. But I believe that this habit would go away in time, and I think that it's very important to understand that financial information is key for any decision maker, not only the entrepreneur, he himself or she herself. It's very important that financial information is something which is reliable, even from the Ministry of Economic Development's perspective. When we want to look into the contribution of our entrepreneurs to the GDP, again the benchmark that we have to go back and look into is the financial information that they have provided to the state organizations. So we believe that from the very beginning, records should be maintained in an appropriate manner in a system which is relevant to them. So they need not necessarily look into a sophisticated system, and like what was mentioned by Krishna, nowadays cloud-based solutions are available for every single business. We can have extremely lean organizations. So this is one of those major advantages for us, because as you all know, most of the SMEs are initiated by our youth, and I think they are very conversant with ICT systems. So I think we are in a very good place, and I believe that the challenges that we face today can be overcome in the future, especially with I would rather say future-proof accountants. Yeah. And I would also like to shed some light on the recent developments, especially on the business and legal framework. And I think most of you would be aware that following the free trade agreement's conclusion, we are looking at an untested water, especially for the present businesses here in Maldives, because again we need more insight to the changing business landscape by professionals. So I believe that there's a vast role for accountants and auditors in order to make sure that we make entry in a successful manner. And then of course, being the registrar of companies, I think I should always shed light on the challenges that we face, especially when it comes to dealing with liquidation issues, when it comes to dealing with insolvency issues. I think these are the key challenges for any company, as well as other separate legal entities such as cooperatives and partnerships. So I think in order to ease out the business process for those young entrepreneurs who have extremely brilliant ideas, it's very important to have the necessary ancillary services by accountants and audit firms, so that they are able to go through a sustainable business, I would rather say sustainable business stage, life stage. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Visam, for the very insights that you have given for the SME sector. So let me turn to Ms. Fareeha. I'm sure you wouldn't agree with Krishna's friend what he has. But you have over the years set up a very successful professional accountancy practice, and I think you look as an inspiration for the young accountants and the auditors to flourish. So given that the challenges that Visam has highlighted regarding the SMEs, how is a small medium practice geared to assist the SME? If you can explain how your firm or any other SMP could assist those SMPs.
Thank you, Niyazy, for the very interesting question. But before I go to the question, that typical description probably fit maybe 15 years ago, yeah, or even 10 years ago. Yeah. I think as profession evolve, I think the softer skills are becoming more important, and people are starting to recognize the need for a more diverse, change in the profession and the image of the profession as well. But I like the sniper thing. Yes. I might follow up on that. I think there is a general perception problem of what kind of services an audit firm provides, and also especially if you are talking about SME or even MSME startups, the idea that some of the services that are required by these smaller firms, smaller companies, businesses, partnerships are actually very expensive, and therefore there is no point in even going and engaging or talking to a firm that provides these specialized services. When we take an SMP or even a full-fledged, a network firm, basically we are providing a wide range of services that covers the entire sort of life cycle of a business, from the inception or from the idea generation to probably liquidation. So almost everything that can be effectively outsourced is in some fashion addressed through either a direct audit firm or their partner consulting arms. So that services are available even for within an SMP. So instead of like talking about let's say very vague definitions, let's take an example. Oftentimes this regulatory requirement of filing tax is the first point in which a startup will approach a firm or an individual accountant. And then from there, this process starts. Our experience has been that since tax has come in, we are able to engage more and more with small firms and larger firms, but mostly smaller firms that are at the verge of sort of migrating to, let's say, micro to small, small to medium, and they are now introduced a little bit more to the kind of services we provide. For instance, you come to a firm or you talk to me about you need this audit done. Then you turn back and, like Professor says, it's, audit can only be done if the accounts are set up. If the accounts are just compiled, then you can go back one stage and talk about how the control systems are, whether the collection is correct. Then you go one step back and talk about whether this business model makes sense. So and that's where we've started actually engaging. But often what happens is when you come at the stage where, MIRA filing is happening tomorrow, or your loan proposal is due tomorrow, you cannot often go back the last 5 years and start compiling. You cannot actually validate your business sustainability idea. You cannot, it's a bit late now. So you've got to wait another 2 years. You've got to wait another 5 years in order to now compile these numbers and showing in business language your idea makes sense. So accounting is the language of business, like the French is the language of love. We need to start speaking the language of business from the beginning. From the beginning, we need to be able to translate everything into numbers, and that's where we come in. That's where we come in at every stage. I think approachability is one issue. We are very bad. I mean, I admit even FJS is very bad at marketing. We don't go out there and we don't actually tell people the kind of services we provide. I think we tend to be at the backstage. Often our clientele is word of mouth. So I think we have to take some responsibility in not being able to attract the right clients, not being able to tell them that we do provide all these services, and they're not expensive to the extent that it's not unreachable. You start with a coffee, and that's what I do often. That coffee is that inception of whether your idea is viable, and that coffee is what now a very expensive 75 rupiah. But from there, you start engaging in that dialogue, and I think even that coffee, that coffee gives ask the right questions, helps those SMEs to get organized. Start keeping the records from day one, so that in 2 years or 3 years, when you want to migrate, when you want to go for financing, you do actually have numbers. You start seeing the trends. You start proving your point. You're not just talking, but the numbers are showing. So that's where accounting becomes important. And we are seeing a trend where the newer businesses, let's say the coffee shops and passion businesses are now looking at these larger numbers, has seen this. Once we start engaging from like Visam, like you mentioned, for example, outsourcing. I think one of you mentioned outsourcing, where we compile accounts month on month, but they're so small that you don't need audits. So we engage in accounts. You see month on month trends, all of a sudden it's interesting. It's beyond just the filing. You see the trends, you see where, this collection is a problem. This receivable, why is it so delayed? Why is our credit? So those questions become important, and then all of a sudden this, you engage. I think in terms of like summarizing, we would, if I have to just list out, it will sound boring, but basically any kind of advisory service, from business planning to feasibility to completely outsourcing your accounting function in terms of actual compilation, the audits, the review of systems, all of this is now can be outsourced without impacting your core business, and where you concentrate on your core business and you ask the experts the right question and you have access to the same sort of resources the STOs and the banks have, that their own, sophisticated accounting and finance departments provide. So that whole function, you sort of engage the same experts at a fraction of the cost by engaging SMPs. So I think that answers.
Yeah,
I hope.
I think so, yes. Thanks, Fareeha, for that. I think from what we have heard from Visam and Fareeha, and I think there is a need for us to have an SME forum or something. Even Mr. Fazil from our office, he's been suggesting and encouraging us for us to have an SME forum where we could bring the auditors and also bring in the SME sector. Perhaps we will, in the future, we would hold one session for that. If I turn to Mr. Krishna, we hear that even the auditors get the accounts on the last minute, and today and the last 2 weeks perhaps they have had sleepless nights preparing the audit reports. So given these issues in the Maldives, and what do you think are the challenges that the audit firms face?
Yeah. The audit firms as a whole in the Maldives,
Yes,
and the specific issue.
Yeah, I think that would.
I guess if you take the challenges for all of us as practicing accountants, some of the theme of today's discussion from various speakers, and also Jana spoke from an industry point of view. He laid out several expectations from a business community point of view. I could not entirely gather what the minister said, but all of that is the need to keep up to date is a challenge for us. That's keep up to date in terms of the technology that is impacting our profession, the regulatory changes, the global regulatory changes that also have an impact. Like I gave one or two examples that is impacting Maldives locally, our businesses is a challenge. Then the globalization of the standards and keeping up to date with those complex standards. You'll hear some of these tomorrow day after sessions. So all that is a challenge. If you look at if you come to some kind of some Maldivian inherent issues, we have some inherent problems here, inherent issues. Probably I'll talk a little bit about that. One is the business structure. If you take our business structures, you have handful or a little bit more than a handful of quoted public companies, definitely under 10. And then you have this multinationals, foreign companies having a limited operation in the Maldives. Leaving that aside, and some state-owned enterprises, and then that aside, vast majority of the companies are proportionately, if you see, I think a very vast majority is like owner-managed, family-run businesses. So that's the business structure side of things. Then in these businesses, what happens there is that the audit is done mainly for tax accounting purposes. So they will come to you for audit and you do that. And some of these are not very small also. Some of these are, this 100 million is a threshold for a large company here. So some of them are in that kind of a size and scale. And so they will come to you this year, then see you later next year they will come again. So it's a relationship between audit to audit. So this audit you finish, next audit you will see him. And the bill also will be, I think, pending for some time. So I think that's an issue. That's one of the issues. But there are mitigating measures for this. I'd like to talk about that mitigating the measures as well. Some of the things that we can do as, I think we got to actively engage. I think Fareeha, you said that. In the sense, often that audit that you perform is a good starting point. If you had an issue on inventory, if you had an issue on some data reconciliation, if you had some issue on bookkeeping, there could be numerous issues. Whatever the issue is, that maybe that could be a starting point, and agenda that item and have some dialogue with you. Have some dialogue, ongoing dialogue during the year. That way you engage. You have the conversation. Keep that working. Then the second matter in that business group is that expectation gap. What you are doing as an auditor and what he thinks you should do as an auditor. There is you must reconcile this. Sometimes you do an audit and he thinks I had a call 3 days ago. This audit was finalized and given to him, and it's an audit engagement. So audit was finalized and given to him. He just signed that. He went to somewhere, Bangkok or someplace, and he came back. And then just one day before, he rang and said, "Hey Krishna, your accounts are wrong. This very high tax this year. So your accounts, my accounts. That is his accounts. We are only giving an opinion on his accounts. So he thinks it is our accounts." So you see, this one example is that the expectation is very different. So you must have the mitigating measure is that you must have a good, strong engagement process. Just sending that engagement template with that, what do you call the TNC, terms and conditions, is not enough. You got to sit with him and explain this. I think many of us don't do that. We send the template, they sign it, they send it back, we put it in the file, and he thinks we are doing something else. He will sign anything what you give him, because that's the trust and relationship he has. So that's another important aspect, to explain what you are going to do in whatever the engagement that is. I just gave an auditor example. It can be a accounting piece work what you do, or some advisory piece what you do, some transaction piece what you do. I think that the dialogue has to happen. Then the culture. The cultural side of thing is that lot of things are done in the last minute, death hour. So, and they do everything in the death hour, and they expect you also to do in the death hour. Do or die along with him. So this is a cultural issue. Now, my senior partner told me that you can't change the wind, but you can change the sail. I kind of try to accommodate that in the process. But I think it is also to do with this engagement issue. They are not actually reading that financial statement. He has some idea about where his business is going. And he has some idea about his inventory, he has some idea about his debtors, cash collection, banking. He has not formally seen the financial statement. Somebody is giving him a cash flow statement, all the positions, cash position every day in the bank. He kind of sees that, and then he kind of works it out in his mind. He has not seen a proper rule-based accounting. So one other thing is that encourage, really we must encourage the businesses to routinely review financial information. Get proper financial statements, if not monthly, at least quarterly. So if they start reviewing this, then this question of my client asking me on the one night before you file the accounts, your account is wrong, will not arise. So again, you got to engage them a bit more actively in this. Then the other challenge is that the cyclical nature of the work. Now in Maldives, the audit side, 90% of the work is done in about 10 to 15% of the time. Is that a fair representation? Now after this time is over, like from tomorrow problem is that there is no work in the assurance side. And what do you really do? So again, like I said, if you are engaged, you can look at ongoing some amount of work that you can do. At least you can manage your overheads, at least have some break-even level of operation during that period. So important for practice management. Then the cost of operations. It's a combined thing in Malay. Cost of doing a practice is not very cheap. You got to pay for maintain a good office. You got to pay for staff, other overheads. So there is a cost to meet. But that cost is like an investment that you make. So you got to manage your work cycle so that it is you are able to at least break even during the off-peak times and have some volume of work around this. Then the other one point that I like to highlight is that we don't have the tradition of training. So it is, I think, a limitation for practitioners. Now, if you go to Sri Lanka, quite a bit was spoken about Sri Lanka, accountants being bred from Sri Lanka. So the good thing, Jana, is that in Sri Lanka is that you have a strong institution. So accounting institution, and then there is this training is a tradition there. So you have a young school leavers or a graduate going into a firm, and then he also has an agreement with the institute and his mentor. So that's normally a 3-year period. During the 3-year period, he goes to a very disciplined period of training. He learns technical skills, he learns leadership skills. We talked about professional skepticism last night, respect. So they learn that. And that end of the 3-year cycle, sometimes he stays in the firm or he goes on and does whatever he wants to do. But then you have a good product coming out of this. But in Maldives, what happens is that very often that you recruit a youngster, he works for you for 6 months or so, and then a bright person, and like he picks up fast, he knows a bit about controls, some preparation of reports, and he gets picked up by the industry at a higher pay, and you have no way of competing with them. It's not a bad thing, it is a good thing, because you are actually producing good skilled person for the industry. But at least if you have a certain amount of time, and then you reap the benefit of your investment. So we don't have that tradition. The tradition has to come. I believe we talked about the PAO for the Maldives, with that legislation coming into place, that being set up, we will have that culture and we'll be able to train and develop good apprentices, have a good supply of apprentices, and then be able to at the same time manage this human resource issue. The good news is this, these are some threats, some issues that we can work around all of that. The good news is that the businesses see us as trusted advisors. That's a fact. In the most clients that we work with, and the most clients you work with, you will come to know they are willing to share confidential information because they trust you. And they see us as people who produce valuable advice. So that, I think that is really great. And we ought to be more creative, more, we got to be more intelligent, we need to be more planning to address some of these issues, and we will be successful.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your practical insights in the Maldives. If I may turn to Professor Inkiju, regarding the financial statements, a set of financial statements is used by a lot of stakeholders, the investors, the financial institutions, and as well as the government, the regulators. And if something had gone wrong, it's mostly after the auditors that everyone goes after. A lot has been talked about the auditor's responsibility, but there hasn't been enough discussion, I believe, on the preparer's responsibility. That's the accountants who prepare the financial statements. So, Professor, if you can share the IFAC's view on this matter. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Niyazy.
Yes, thank you.
Actually, that's when we study about auditing, the first question was the company want their financial statement audited voluntarily, or should be mandated. But before we have some Security Act in the United States, many companies voluntarily, get audited for their financial statement because they want to show their financial statement is trustworthy. Otherwise, their company will be undervalued, underestimated. So that the company itself has some kind of a motivation to show their financial statement is kind of trustworthy. That's starting point. And after that, to make that more efficient, there's a government moved in and they make us all the laws and regulations, all the companies should be audited. That makes some kind of a misconception that investors, consumers of that financial statement think that auditors, outside auditors, are that responsible. They have some main responsibility to get that audit financial statement should be right. But actually, the preparers are the starting their information. So preparers have the main responsibility to make right information. And auditors will just make a professional judgment with a limited number of analysis of that financial data. So that we need some communication with investors. So between the to reduce the gap between that expectation from the investors and also that the service level the auditor can provide. So there is some kind of a match between that expectation from the investors and that auditors can provide. Because if you try to give the services to meet what is the investors' demand, then audit fees will be kind of a hugely increased. You cannot bear that all the cost. The corporations cannot take that all the cost. So there will be some cost and benefit. So how much that investors can invest, expect, and how much that auditors should take a responsibility for that the fairness of their financial statements. We should have that good dialogue first. And also, that primary responsibilities belong to that corporation that make sure that investors understand. So preparers include that actually preparing that financial statement, but also oversighting that financial statement within the company, like internal auditors or the audit committee. They have some responsibility. And also CFO, CEO, they also have a responsibility. They have a huge responsibility. So there will be some cooperation between the outside auditors and preparers. They have to work together. How should we prepare the useful and trustworthy, transparent financial statement? Not just rely on that auditors is not the right, that's a kind of way to get the useful or trustworthy financial statement. So again, that I will emphasize that even to guarantee the quality of financial statement, we should have a multi-stakeholder approach, not solely responsible by the auditors, but also all interested parties should take a responsibility to produce the financial statement can be used reliably in the capital market. That's, I think, is important.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the concise answers. If I may again turn to Ms. Visam, as you have been involved in a lot of policy initiatives with regard to businesses, can you please guide us on the legal and regulatory expectations that are coming up that will impact the businesses and the accounting community?
Yeah, thank you, Niyazy. I think it might be worthwhile to highlight what's in the pipeline. Over the past 2 years, we have been working on an amendment to the Companies Bill the idea is to repeal the existing bill and put in place a more modern infrastructure for the purpose of forming continuous businesses as well as deregistration. When it comes to deregistration, as you all know, especially with the existing liquidation process, we have some level of uncertainty for companies as to when the entire process will complete. So I think with the amendment to the Companies Bill, we should be able to introduce a more conducive regime for existing companies and newly incorporated companies. And apart from that, I think the Insolvency Bill is also in the pipeline, as well as the Secure Transactions Law. These two legislations, I believe, would create a lot of business for both of you. A lot of companies would be looking at rehabilitation services, especially under the insolvency regime. And as for the Secure Transaction Law, we are looking at again producing more reliable financial information from companies within a short term as well as during the annual financial information dissemination process. I think it's also important to highlight, stemming out from what was discussed by Mr. Krishna, the fundamental problem that we believe, based on the information as well as the reports that we have received so far from registered companies, what we believe is that there is also a major governance problem here, because at the end of the day, the purpose for which this financial information is produced and the reliability, the basis for having or putting in a system in place is, at the end of the day, ensuring that shareholders receive adequate information. And I think here one of the challenges is also that a number of businesses, of course, if we look at our entire business registry, we are looking at over 90% of companies which are micro and small scale businesses. And for these companies, because the basis of their registration is expanding a family owned business, so the new business regime, Business Registration Act, has imposed a requirement over them to conduct their business affairs in a regulated environment after registration. So what I'm trying to say is that the changes in the business registration the legal framework has also pushed a lot of entrepreneurs into a new system whereby they are still trying to familiarize as to what needs to be done. So within the legal and regulatory framework, we are also trying to put in place a better governance structure, especially the company's amendment bill will introduce a regime where directors will be held liable for their actions, including directors' roles and responsibilities will be, I would say, detailed out, which I believe would resolve a lot of problems, especially when it comes to the director who is responsible for compiling and ensuring that the financial statements are prepared, readily prepared for the purpose of audit. I think right now the Companies Act does not necessarily provide a specific duty over a specific director. Rather than that, it's the director's board which is responsible, and yes, managing director is also responsible to a greater extent, I would say. And I think with these amendments, eventually we will be looking at a more transparent system, and that system itself would act as a catalyst for more companies to become sustainable companies.
Thank you, Visam. I'm getting some signals from Adam that we are almost running out of time. But since there are two very important questions, if you can, Fareeha, if you can answer it very briefly. Regarding the financial institutions, is there any confidence issues regarding the reports that the small and medium practices prepare?
Well, if you think about it, 10 years back, financial institutions didn't accept or audited financial statements from just anybody. It was just the big three. But from the banker's perspective, also because I had the privilege to sit on the other side and look at the reasons behind it, you could see why that happens. The audit itself, the primary reason is to have somebody independent who is qualified to make a judgment about the true and fairness of these statements. And therefore, bankers themselves are not experts on whether these auditors themselves are qualified or not. So unless there was a regulatory authority that was saying, okay, these people or these institutions have the quality to look at financial statements and make a judgment, then it becomes very difficult for anybody else to say, okay, this independent report is in fact independent or reliable. But now you see that since the new regulations have come out, it has become more transparent what an auditor is required to do, what CPD requirements are. In addition to that, I think the whole mentoring process and the review process that has recently been introduced has made a lot of difference in how the SMPs do their audits themselves, and also creating a lot of confidence. So now I don't think, at least from FJS's perspective, we don't have that much issues in getting any financial institutions to accept our audit reports as being credible. That's a very short answer because you said briefly.
Yes, thanks for that. Yeah, good to hear that the situation has improved during the last 4 to 5 years. One final question to Professor Inkiju, and I think it's a very, very important question for the profession. If you could explain how the Maldives can get the IFAC assistance to build the professional accountancy organization.
Okay. Thank you for the question. Actually, that I would say that major accounting firms in the Maldives are SMPs, and actually that IFAC, among these 3 million accountants, 90% are from SMPs. So SMP is a very important kind of institute for that IFAC. So we have SMP committee to take care of that the SMP needs, to address that the SMP needs. And every 2 years we have some survey to around the world that what we can solve for the SMPs. And besides that, we also have some what is the website, a website for the Global Knowledge Gateway. So you get into that Global Knowledge Gateway to get the information. We have many kind of resources you can use for the SMP practice. So that's you can use it. So knowledge, what is that? The Global Knowledge Gateway, and also that we also have a good practice management guide. It is issued by the SMP committee, so you can also use that information resources. So actually, that if you just get into that IFAC website, you will see a lot of resources which can be used for SMP management, SMP development.
Thank you. So we've almost reached the end of the panel discussion. Adam, would you permit us to take 1 or 2 questions from the floor? Yes. Yes. Please tell your name and the institution.
I'm Shafiq. I'm like a teacher, I can say. Okay?
Yes.
Actually, for the users of financial statements, we have internal, external users. For them, it is even difficult to understand why profit is not equal to cash. My question is, why accounting standard setters, they are very coming up with complex standards like IFRS 9 they introduced this year. What may be the reason behind that? Even now it's so difficult to understand and analyze financial statement for the majority of the users. Anybody can answer, give your opinion.
I will maybe make a comment or two, but then maybe I'll ask Mr. Jayasinghe to comment. He's a subject matter expert. You see the yeah. So the question is that we are dealing in a very complex world. It is cash is one element of this financial statement. You can always have a reconciliation of the cash and the profit. The issue here is that in a very complex in a world in which we do the business, And we need to understand the standards are not, it's a global standard, and it takes into consideration, several industries, several economies, the scale in which it is, applied. So the fundamentally, I think in a complex situation, the complex problem requires complex solutions. So that's, I guess, is a fundamental issue. So locally, when we sometimes look at it, it may be sometimes it's over the top. But in a global setting, if you look at it, that's the response I have. Probably I'll ask Mr. Jasingh to elaborate a little bit on that.
There was a couple of things that IFRS 9 tried to address. First of all, when a bank, when it recognizes income, it recognizes income on a risk premium, the risk, right? So when you price a loan, you have the risk-free and you price it for a default as well. The risk premium is for that default. So you had a system in the world in the past where you made, say, provisions or impairment provisions or whatever it is on historical events. But your income, you're taking into account future events. So now there's two issues. One is you could have come up with a formula to defer that income. The other one is you could have come up with a formula to try and see and estimate what those events are and make provisions. So of course, as you know, you start getting into the estimation process of future, it becomes very complicated. So that was one of the reasons. The other thing is the world, there were several things. There was this 2008 financial crisis, which also showed the pro-cyclicality. That is, in good times you make provisions, in bad times you avoid provisions. So it had a lot of issues like this, which it tried to resolve. Now that is not to say that all those things have got resolved, even though the standard has got more complicated. But really the standard hasn't got complicated, it has got complicated only in the context of making impairment provisions, where it's moving away from incurred loss model to a expected loss model. So that's where the real crunch is, and why it went into an expected loss model is, say for example, you had a loan, you continue to recognize income on the default, and then you made a provision at the end. So is that fair financial presentation? Because you are taking credit for the income and then making a provision later. That is the incurred loss model. Because why? You make a provision only when the event that gives rise to a loss happened, which is going to happen obviously in the future. So there's more cash based. So that's one of the reasons. But of course, as you know, today the world, we don't do simple account, or we don't do simple business, can I put it that way? The products that we offer, the transactions we do, everything is complex. So obviously when you have a complex process, the standards are also going to be complex in trying to capture the essence of the transaction or the economic reality of the transaction and reporting on it. That's why. Apart from the impairment, I don't think the rest of the standard is all that complicated. Actually, it has simplified some areas. Some of the areas that there was complications, like say for example, the tainting provisions have been removed. So some areas they have actually simplified. Of course, some areas, especially the impairment, has got a bit more complicated because it's looking at a futuristic model. The reason is, to my knowledge, it's this, because you had a mismatch between the way we recognize the income and the way we accounted for the losses.
Yes. Thank you, Mariyam, for that. If I can have one question, and I think it could be directly to Professor Nkiju, because he's going to leave today. The other panelists are there in the Maldives, so you can catch hold of them some other time. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I represent Maldives Civil Service. Mostly the discussion has been hovering over private sector or SMEs. But first of all, let me congratulate Audit Office for convening in such a forum. I think it's very useful, and let me also recognize and thank our distinguished panel for your insightful thoughts. We in civil service, I'm not accountant, neither an auditor, but I'm sort of a manager. And our staff in most civil service administrations definitely do not look upon with a welcome smile the auditors and accountants. But they think these are monetary policemen coming up here, policewomen coming up, to find fault, not to give compliments. And day by day we see, in order to, under the disguise, the name of internal audit mechanism improving, a lot of red tape is increased. Our officers find it hard. They don't get a complimentary pay increase, but more work they have to do, more painful exercise they have to undergo, because the financial regulations have been always strengthened or enlarged and asking more tasks to be performed by these officers. And so I was curious, we are in civil service, we are aiming for managerial excellence as well as service excellence. And we want to deliver service to the community as soon as we can. But when the financial regulation demands so many transactions and letters to be written, permissions to be sought, and that really delaying the process when we are trying to expedite the process of service delivery. So accountants are happy the more they get regulations, what do you call, there is so-called ground level structure which is very inflexible, not open sky, what we call flexibility in day-to-day management of the civil service. I may be very skeptical or cynical here, but excuse me if I'm so. But more on a positive tone, I've been curious to understand what are the current trendy measures in order to stop corruption or irregularities. Are we supposed to increase more rule-based measures, or rather more lenient ways where our officers can, perform their jobs with ease and pleasantly? So I don't know whom to address this question, but anybody could have. Yes. Recently I was attending a Dubai forum, and there they were saying we are now not increasing the red tape or the layers of measures that the financial officers and accountants has to undergo. Rather, we are now quarterly auditing. Auditing is increased so that they can address the issues and concerns of corruption and irregularities. But I'm not sure you are the best people here. So what would be the best international emerging practices now? Because in civil service, we are looking at quick service delivery. Whereas when this money comes, it's very tough. We see auditors coming here, but I want to congratulate of sometimes. Recently, JSC, I'm also a member of this Judicial Service Commission, and we were going through the report issued by auditor. The only time I came across their compliment, there was a complimentary statement for JSC statement. But Civil Service Commission and others, we do have a lot of issues to address, and usually the managerial hands or the brains are always not with a smile, but with a grin and looking scary after audit reports. So we are looking very innovative way with open sky, measures where things can become easy rather than becoming barriers. Thank you very much, sir.
Since I'm leaving, so as a first, leave it to you. Add some, what I said. Actually, that nowadays is a key. Another key that's a kind of item is the issue is the smart regulation. Even though every country has the same regulation, how do we apply the regulation? How do we minimize the cost? How do we maximize the benefit? is that your regulators' duties and also that's every organization's duty to find the best way to have that's a smart regulation. Because we understand the purpose of regulation to monitor the situation. But if regulation works just as a regulation, as you mentioned, so then it can be some cost is too big than the benefit. So now there's a big challenge today all over the world. As you mentioned, regulation is becoming more regulations. As business becoming more complicated, more regulations. Now challenge is, how can you have smart regulation? How can you reduce cost? However, maintain or maximize the benefit. That's every regulator's challenge, every country's challenge. That I think I would say that much. And go to details, maybe.
I don't know if Niyazy, you would like to comment from the Auditor General's point of view?
I think I'm getting a red card from Adam that I may have to go down on stage. But I think we've had a lot of interesting questions and answers. I'm sure there would be more questions, but since we are running out of time, I'm inclined to stop here. And I would like to thank you all for listening very patiently and to the very interesting discussions that had been going on. And thank you, panelists, for joining us. Let me also, please join me to give a good round of applause to the panelists. And also, since Professor Nkiju is going to leave this evening, we would wish you all the best, and also thank you for coming to the Maldives and representing IFAC. I am sure in the coming years, under your leadership, we hope to get IFAC membership.
Sure.
So thank you for that.
Thank you very much. I'm very much impressed by your passion and your enthusiasm to build accounting infrastructure and also establishing payrolls. I wish you are successful in establishing your payrolls. So 4 years from now, India, Mumbai will host the World Congress. So you will attend that World Congress as a member of IFAC in 4 years.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.